This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. It's Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porque says cheated.
What was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Carr wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open Cup seriously.
Welcome to another episode of Nos Arietes, sponsored by Full Pull Wines and you, our subscribers. We're recording on Thursday, November 7th, 2024. I'm your host, Jeremiah Shan. Joining me today are my co-host, Aaron Campo, and our engineer, Lickett. Well, just off the bat, I just want to say that if this show feels a little bit less celebratory and fun than it deserves to be, I apologize. This is actually we delayed the show twice because we weren't going to record on Tuesday. We thought we were going to record on Wednesday. We did not do that. But I don't want to bog this down too much with politics or whatever. But I think anyone who listens to the show probably knows where Aaron and I are coming from. And we don't need to spend a whole lot of time on that. So I'll just say this is a Sounders podcast, and we've got some genuinely positive things to talk about. So let's do that. I'm sure most of you are listening to this as an escape anyway. So let's just start there. Even if it wasn't the prettiest performance, the Sounders made it through to the Western Conference semifinals after beating the Houston Dynamo in another shootout on Sunday. This time they needed 7 rounds to do it with Stephen Fry coming up with a save on Tate Schmidt's final attempt to seal the result. It marks the 14th time in 16 seasons that the Sounders have at least advanced this far, and they now have about 3 weeks to rest up for either LAFC or the Vancouver Whitecaps, who will play tomorrow. And then we still don't even know when that game is, but anyway, Aaron, what do you make of this performance? What do you make of sort of the bigger picture surrounding the Sounders right now?
I think it was a very 2024 Sounders performance.
Yeah,
and I mean that in every sense it could be taken. I think the circumstances that they went into the game without Alvaro Snack, without Jordan Morris, make it really impressive. To be able to get the game to penalties, almost won it in regulation. And, I think it's one that they can be proud of. It was not one that I think anyone enjoyed watching too much. It was, I've defended the way the Sounders play this year a lot. I tend to like the way they play, their style of play. I'd love them to score a few more goals, but generally they just play a style of soccer that I really enjoy. They did not do that on Sunday. It was not enjoyable.
It was a pretty boring game up until the end.
Yeah. But that's okay. I mean, you're missing your 2 best attacking players, and you're under pressure from a Houston midfield that has been really good this year. And when they were able to go up a man, and I'm sure we'll talk about those circumstances a little later. But they were able to get the goal. They weren't able to keep Houston off the board, which is frustrating. And that's been a little bit of a trend this year, giving up those late goals in situations where they really shouldn't. But credit to Houston. I mean, they played, I thought, really, really well. And look, I don't love that teams can advance on 2 shootouts. I think that kind of sucks. I think you should have to win at least 1 game in regulation to get out. If it's going to be 2 games, if it goes to 3, obviously, there's no other way to do it. But that's the system. And I don't think there was any way the Sounders were doing anything but playing, not necessarily playing for penalties, but playing with the idea that getting to penalties was a pretty good result considering who they were missing. And they did quite a good job of it. And I'm very glad to be through that series. Houston's a good team. I felt confident that the Sounders were going to win, but I also could easily have foreseen a reality where Houston got the better of them. So to get out in 2, to give the team a little bit of extra time to rest up, I think is a really positive thing.
Yeah, having 3 weeks off is not ideal from a competitive standpoint. Purely for the Sounders, the fact that it hopefully erases any doubt that they'll be at full strength when they come back to play. That's obviously a positive. I definitely wasn't looking forward to the prospect of us talking about whether or not Rusnak and Morris were going to be available for a potential third leg or third game. So, like, in that sense, I think getting out of this round after 2 rounds was clearly the preferred method here. I will say, since you mentioned it, I don't so much mind teams that advance on 2 shootouts the way that the Sounders and actually Minnesota United did as well. The thing that I've always been worried about, and I do think is continues to be a significant flaw in this system, is when a team wins in regulation in one of those first 2 games and then gets eliminated by 2 shootouts. Like that's where the scales start to feel tipped to me.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
If you play 2 games, you win 2 shutouts, whatever. Like that's not the way I would want to do it, but I don't really have an issue with that. It's when you lose in regulation and then you come back and win, like it obviously didn't happen this way, but like the Rapids losing 5-0 in the first leg and it really not being any different than them losing in a shootout. That doesn't sit real well with me, but that's the system we're using. That's the system the Sounders are in. This was not, like I said, this was not a particularly exciting game. I will say that the Sounders deserve a fair amount of credit, I think, for the way they performed in the shootouts, both of them.
Yeah.
They went 12 for 12 from the spot. Really the only attempt that Steve Clark even came close to making was the one on Obed Vargas, which ended up being the winning kick for the Sounders in this leg. I watched that replay a few times. I still don't understand how he managed not to save it, because he dives and gets like both hands to it, and somehow it just still goes.
Yeah,
it's kind of perfect. Apparently, Steve Clark has now allowed 17 straight penalty attempts, which
that's not what you want.
It's not what you want, especially for a guy who was talking a lot before both shootouts. Did not perform quite up to the standard that he set for himself there. But everyone else, other than the Obed Vargas one, I thought everyone else looked great. Really, really great in terms of their confidence, where they put it. Like, it wasn't quite as clinical as the first shootout where you had, basically 3 straight unsavable penalties to seal it. Like, most of these penalties were plausibly savable if Clark had guessed the right way. But, he didn't on almost any of them. So I love the Rui Diaz one where he clearly was playing the Panenka, and as a result, he was very slow to react when Raul just kind of blasted it almost down the middle. And he did get a little bit of a hand to it, but it was, he hit it so hard and he got such a late jump, he was never going to save it. So I found myself feeling, I don't know. I see if the Sounders go to another shootout in this series, in this playoff, I will still feel very nervous, but they have shown that they can do it. Steph Fry made, he didn't make the save until the 7th round, and what is becoming a trend with him, he made another save, but he was off his line, which I swear to God, he's done that 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
But these are good things. These are good things to be complaining about. If the Sounders had gone out, if they'd lost both of these shootouts, obviously we'd be singing a very different tune, but they didn't.
Yeah. That's the thing, right? You you play the game by the rules, and the rules are, if you win the shootout, you get a point, as it were, and first 1 to 2 points advances. And I think, obviously, if the Sounders had lost that first shootout, I think the second leg probably looks a lot different. I think
that's fair.
There's a decent chance Jordan Morris plays, I think. I don't know if Rusnak was in the
realm
same
of possibility.
Yeah, I don't know if Rusnak was in the same situation where it was more of a precaution, but I don't think the Sounders would have played as defensively. They wouldn't have had the luxury of doing so.
It would have been a different game plan.
Yeah, and I feel confident in this team's ability to get the results they need. So, I think to say that they were lucky, I mean, to some degree, sure, they were. But I think to say that, the fact that they advanced via 2 shootouts takes away anything from getting through the series, I think is kind of missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, and honestly, the playoffs have never been about style points. It's never been something where, the best the Sounders ever looked in the playoffs was probably 2017, where they sort of like blitzed their way through the Western Conference. They came into the MLS Cup absolutely flying, and they got smashed. Even though the scoreline was only 2-0, they really got outplayed by the widest margin of any championship game they've been in, I'd say. And I only bring that up because form, especially in the playoffs, is just not really worth anything.
No, it's really not. The Sounders' whole thing is keeping the scoring environment low. They're not going to give up a lot of goals. They're going to stay in every game. And when other teams are also playing a little more tense and defensively than maybe they typically do, the thing with Houston has coming into this series was Houston's going to play. They're not going to sit back, and they set way back in the first leg. And I didn't think they were as aggressive as they typically are in the second leg either, even though they needed to win.
They had a pretty low line of confrontation in both games, even by their standards.
Yeah. And whether that's down to the Sounders being able to force them to do that to some degree, or whether they are just going to be a little more conservative in the playoffs, which I think most teams tend to be. Either way, I mean, that was the reality. It was just a tense game, and both games were pretty tense and defensive, and the Sounders, any teams that want to try to outdo the Sounders in that regard, I welcome them to try to do that. I think that's going to work out pretty well for the Sounders if that's the way teams choose to approach things.
Yeah, especially if they don't. I mean, and I think Houston was probably particularly poorly suited to play that kind of game because they didn't have guys that were gonna, break you down individually. Whereas like an LAFC can kind of play that game, but there's not a lot of, other than LAFC, I don't think there's really any teams that can reliably play that kind of game with the Sounders and hope to get away with it. Does Christian Roldan's scoring though, does that change? Is that worth anything from a narrative perspective?
I mean, I think it is. It would have been really frustrating to have 2 consecutive 0-0s when you played a decent chunk of time up a man.
Yeah. 60. They ended up playing up a man over 60 minutes in the 2 games.
And I think that the Sounders have not been great playing up a man this year. Again, they were missing their 2 most important offensive players. So those things are certainly factors as well. But I felt much better that he was able to get on the board. Absolutely.
It was a nice play too.
It was
nice
it was
give
a very
and
nice
go
goal
between Leyva and Nuhu. And Nuhu's cross was, I mean, it was
great.
Perfect. It was a perfect cross.
Yeah, it was one of his better passes. Although I do feel like he has gotten better in the final third the last few months.
Yeah,
which is, maybe it's small sample size flukiness. I don't know. It's not typically a skill guys add at this stage in their careers, but
I think he's good at is he's better. I think he's making better decisions in the final third. Like he'll every now and then he'll hit a shot where you're like, what are you doing? Yeah. But for the most part, I feel like when he shoots, it's because he's got a legitimate look, and he's better about sort of driving that ball. He's better about trying to do the sort of Manchester City thing which was this play basically where he drives to the end line and then cuts it back to the penalty spot. And Christian, who I will say that this is the good thing about that is Christian has struggled offensively this year. This was only his second goal, I believe, in all comps. And so I think that's good for him because if they can get him feeling a little better offensively, that's clearly good. A little ironic that it comes after he had moved back a line. He started the game as a number 10. At halftime, he and Obed Vargas switched. And then when Danny Leyva came in, obviously he was still sitting back there. So a little ironic that it comes after he's being asked to do less offensively, but it was good. It's good for him to see the ball hit the back of the net, did you, I don't quite know how to feel about it because it's so weird, but Houston just shooting themselves in the foot both games.
Shocking. Yeah.
Picking up just brain dead red cards.
Yeah. And I mean, one of them from your captain, one of them from another key,
your star player.
Yeah. Just shocking. I have never seen that. I can tell you that much. I remember when VAR first came online and Dempsey got sent off for the sack tap, and people said, man, players aren't going to be able to get away with this stuff anymore. And
they're going to have to stop.
And I think for the most part they have, right?
Yeah.
Players have internalized the fact that they are being filmed and they can't do that kind of stuff anymore. And this was just the most blatant thing in the world. And Ben Olsen's reaction to it was just like talking about the number of red cards they've had to the referee.
Yeah, like the fourth. Why do you think the fourth officer cares that you've got 5 red cards against the Sounders? Like
he spit on the guy. Like he spit on. What do you want? What do you want, man?
The funniest thing is that it's not like he spit and then tried to play it off like I'm just clearing my throat or something. It was he like looks at him and he spits at, like he does the like I'm doing this at your feet kind of thing. Like I'm spitting on your. I am absolutely disrespecting you, and I am and then he mad dogs him after, and of course Armando Villarreal had his back turned the whole time. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know if that makes it worse or better, but like everyone. It was the most obvious. Like it was the most obvious thing. It was the most obvious thing.
There was no plausible deniability, and I think the thing that's crazy to me is that, like, I think Herrera. My recollection is that he was pretty much like, yeah, whatever. Like he didn't really try to fight it too much, and that's the thing that makes Olsen's reaction so shocking. Is it's like this was not a judgment call. Like he saw a video of a guy spitting at him.
It's like, I mean, effectively a boundary call. It's like, why are we arguing?
Right.
Like,
and I saw a few people be like, well, I mean, he probably didn't see it. So he doesn't really know what's going on. And it's like, okay, well, the referee said, hey, he spit at me into a microphone. Like that's, he's not going to just make that up, because I don't think anyone could say Armando Villarreal was looking to hand out a bunch of cards in that game. Like it was an extremely physical game.
And I will say I watched Ben Olsen's press conference after, and he had sort of like kind of he was much more composed, but he ratcheted back his complaints, and he was more focused on, and this was, I don't think it doesn't justify it, but it did give some, at least it's a little better angle, which was he felt like the referee was allowing the game to get out of control. And so when the game's out of control, players are getting frustrated. That doesn't excuse the behavior, but it sort of explains it. Yeah. I don't quite buy it, because the Sounders were not doing anything. Like there's still like a range of emotions that you can show your frustration over. Like I'm a little bit more sympathetic, and maybe this is homerism. I'm more sympathetic to Obed Vargas in a game where the referee is not doing a good job controlling the game, like swinging, like yelling and swinging his arm in frustration. Like that's, to me, that's a harsh red card, right? This is, you spit
you spit on him on camera in 4K.
Like I get that you're frustrated, but like there's other things you can do. Like if he had just cussed him out, which there were several instances of that in this game. Like there were numerous instances of dissent that were shown in this game. that were unpunished, and fair enough. But it was, I don't know, it was just, I'm not surprised. I guess I'm not very surprised that Hector Herrera's option was not exercised.
Yeah. Pretty appalling behavior from a designated player and a guy wearing the captain's armband for your team,
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes Nos Audietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. So the other thing about Christian that I felt like we should bring up is, he ends up giving up the own goal, which I don't really think is on him. That was, he's trying to put himself in a position to block, to defend, and it just happens to, like, I guess it ricochets off Fry and it goes off him. So to me, that's the issue. There was more the turnover and sort of failing to close down, like put any pressure at all on Dorsey, who sends in the cross. I don't need to go through all that. But what I was impressed by is Roldan knows that ball came off him. He knows it's an own goal that has to feel like shit. And he basically demands to be the first shooter in the shootout and then absolutely roofs his penalty. He's not someone, he's missed penalties at least once, if not more than that, in shootouts before. And he, really confidently hit both of his penalties in these shootouts. I actually was legitimately impressed by that.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of leadership you want from a guy like Christian, who is so important to the team. And I mean, I think
spitting on people.
Absolutely. And I do think it takes a lot of guts to do that, to own up to your mistake, which, as you said, like, I'm hesitant to even label as a mistake, and go out there and get it done. And his penalty in the first leg was great as well. Like, I think he's found his penalty taking method, which is just knock the piss out of it, Yeah.
Jackson Reagan, from the Jackson Reagan school. I thought there was actually a pretty great quote today from Brian, when he was talking to the press after training today, and someone asked him, well, what was the conversation you had with Jackson Reagan? And he's like, well, I don't really have much of a conversation. I just said, I need you to take a penalty. He says, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah. That's what you want. He seems like a like supernaturally unflappable guy.
Jackson.
Yeah.
And that's, he definitely has that demeanor of like, it's hard to imagine him getting too worked. Like, we've seen it more in games. Like, I think that he's made a point of trying to sort of bring that out in himself, but I think he is sort of like at his heart, sort of a gentle giant type.
Yeah.
If there was I don't know, what did you make of Raul Ruidiaz's performance in this one? I mean, he was basically a non-factor, right?
He was. On rewatch, I felt like I was a little harsh on him in the moment, because he was being asked to do a lot of dirty work without any support, and that's tough to do.
Sure.
And so I don't want to be too harsh on him, I guess, but he was a non-factor. I mean, he wasn't really doing anything in the final third. And his hold-up play, despite what's being asked of him, it is what was being asked of him, and he didn't do it well. And I think having him there and having the outlet, even though he wasn't performing effectively as an outlet, was important. I don't think this game goes away. It does if there's nobody upfield to bump the ball up to when the Sounders were under pressure. So I think it was still the right decision to play him there. But he's just a super limited player right now. And, I'm glad that he's on the team for penalties, because I think he's probably the best penalty taker on the team. And,
I would agree with that.
And I still think that he's a guy where if you need a goal late, I'm more than happy to see him come on, because I do think he's capable of creating something from nothing in a way that other guys on the team aren't. But he's just not a 90-minute player. And I think I said on the last episode, if he plays 90 minutes, we're in trouble. And it didn't turn out that way, but I don't think it turned out that way because of Raul. I think it was in spite of him, unfortunately.
And it was kind of a tough situation the Sounders were in. We haven't talked about it yet on here, but Danny Musovski picked up a quad injury, I guess, on Friday, I think it was. And apparently it's a reasonably serious quad injury. They think he's done for the year. I don't know how seriously they were considering starting him over Raul, but having him available for this game would have been nice.
Yeah.
So kind of a bummer that he wasn't available. Hopefully it ends up being a moot point from here forward. But one thing I did want to, I sort of mentioned this in the beginning. I didn't really get into it, but I do think it deserves a little bit of time to talk about. We've talked a lot over the years about their consistency, and I think it's easy to overlook it. But, I mentioned that they have made the conference semifinals in 14 of 16 years. And the conference semifinals might not sound that great, and it's not. Like, just simply getting there is not a particularly great accomplishment. But what's amazing to me about that achievement is that there are only 6 teams in MLS history who have gotten that far more often than the Sounders. All 6 of those teams are original MLS teams. And as you may remember, from basically 1996 until 2000, until the Sounders came into the league, really, almost everyone made the playoffs. It was really like there was a bunch of years where 8 of 10 teams made the playoffs. And if you made the playoffs, you were in the conference semifinals. Although it wasn't until 2012, I believe, that if you made the playoffs, you weren't already into the conference semifinals. So that sort of gives you a sense of what that achievement meant pre-Sounders. It really was not an achievement at all. But still, the teams that have made it that far are all original teams. The Sounders have made it there more than any of the expansion teams that have come in since those original teams. But what's even more crazy is that if you take all 122 seasons of all the teams that came into the league after the Sounders, they've only made that far 35 times. So it's like basically, a little more than double the number of times the Sounders have, but in 10 times as many seasons, essentially. And what's the thing I thought was kind of crazy. If you take the 60 of those teams, if you take the 3 teams that have made it to the semifinals, conference semifinals the most, which is NYCFC, the Philadelphia Union, and Portland Timbers, collectively, they've only made it 16 times. So which isn't, again, I don't want to make it sound like getting to the conference semifinals is some great achievement, but like LAFC has only done it 3 times. The Timbers have only done it, I think, 5 times. You can kind of just go down the list. It's not a thing that teams are doing with a lot of regularity. And I don't know. I think I think it speaks to the thing that makes the Sounders so good, but also what makes it very easy to undersell how good they are or how good they've been.
Yeah, I think that it's one thing to demand excellence, and I think that that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
That our fan base is good about, and I think they should continue to be good about that. I think it's good to be passionate and to hold the team accountable for their failings, and because they're certainly not infallible. I mean, I think we've been critical.
No, I think
of a lot
this
of
year
things.
we've been able to point out plenty of flaws.
But I do think that it's important not to lose sight of the bigger picture and realize how fortunate we've been with this team. I mean, missing the playoffs once and in a year that, they won the biggest competition in which they are capable of playing for. I mean, I guess the Club World Cup, but if that even is a thing that happens, I think is, just a testament to that, right? They're always right there. You always feel going into the season like there's a chance. And that's rare in sports, and especially in American sports, right? Like MLS just has parity across seasons that most other top soccer leagues don't. So, unless you're a fan of one of the big 3 or 4 teams in England or Spain or what have you, it's just not something you get to have that that sort of predictability and hope. And there's been a lot more good times than bad, that's for sure. And that's something that we should never take for granted, because it can change pretty quickly.
It can, and I think you look at how many teams underperform in any given year, underperform their expectations, and certainly the Sounders don't always exceed or even meet their own expectations. But a bad Sounders season is still considered a very good season for almost anyone else.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's going to happen from here on out, but it's been, to me, I feel like they've at least reached the bare minimum for us to not say that this was a sort of lost season. They got 57, 56, 57. How many points did they get in the regular season?
Great question. They got 57. Yeah.
Okay.
57
so that's
points.
57 points is a solid haul. I think we talked about how that's a top 5 season for them.
Yeah.
And it's not been a hugely, I'm not going to pitch anyone on the idea that it's been a hugely successful season, but I will say this, that I think we're at the point now where either they make MLS Cup or they don't. Like, to me, like, whether if they go out in this round or the round after, if they go out in the conference semifinals or if they go out in the conference finals, the difference between those two things is not enough for me to sway my opinion of this season.
Yeah.
The only way it gets better to me is really better if they get to MLS Cup. All of a sudden, I think you start talking about this as a really successful season for them. I don't know. They've got a massive hill to climb to get there still. But I don't know. I was talking to people about this at training today, about how I don't know if I care who they face in the next round, because if they can't beat LAFC, they probably aren't capable of beating LA Galaxy either, especially on the road. Galaxy are probably the best team, look like the best team in the Western Conference right now. And it would be I feel like it would be way more painful to go out. Like, I think they have a better chance of beating the Whitecaps than they do of beating LAFC. And I suppose I would, all things being equal, I'd rather host the Whitecaps than go to LAFC. But part of me is not really that worried about it, because if they go to LAFC and they win, great. I actually feel like they might have a chance to beat the Galaxy. If they go to LAFC and lose, I kind of feel like, well, they probably weren't going to be the Galaxy anyway.
Yeah. I think that beating LAFC to me is enough for me to feel much better about this season, even if they do go out the next round. But I think if you're analyzing the season on a level, if you're analyzing the season on a level beyond the emotional feeling, like the satisfaction that I think fans would get from beating LAFC, I think you're spot on. I think they've met the bar for what I would consider a good season now. And if they lose, they're going to lose to a good team, most likely. I guess they could lose to Vancouver. That is a possibility, but most likely they're going to be losing to a good team if they lose. And
I'll add this caveat to also. I feel like in a way it would be, if they're gonna lose in the next round regardless, I think it's better that they lose to LAFC.
Oh yeah,
because I feel like that at least makes it all the more clear that they have to go out and invest, because they will have now been eliminated by LAFC in 4 straight competitions. It's very clear that there's a gap between these two teams. If they go out against the Whitecaps, it's going to be like, well, the Whitecaps they're not spending any more than we are. Why should, we know that's not the problem.
Right. Or it's just like, it's easy to chalk it up as a fluke,
Right. It's easy to chalk it up as a fluke.
The RSL game in 2022. Is that when that
21
was?
21.
21?
Yeah, because 22 they make playoffs.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. In any case, I I think it's easier to say, oh, it's a fluke, rather than, like you said,
Right.
LAFC is the standard bearer and we can't beat them. I would hope it wouldn't matter, but I do think it's better to be safe than sorry. Because yeah, they have to invest in the team. I don't think we can count on this group of players doing this again next year. But I think if you add a couple of key pieces, they could be back to being at the standard bearer kind of level themselves.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what we have to say about this. I don't know if we have anything else to really get too much into. I'll just share. I was shocked that Jim Curtin got fired by Philadelphia Union today.
Yeah. I saw a couple Union fans talking about it today, and the gist seems to be that there's a desire, the Union kind of want to break up this group of players, and Curtin's not ready to maybe do that and wants another go at it. And so it's more of a, we're just not compatible anymore kind of situation. But I think if I'm the Union, I figure out a way to make Jim Curtin happy. I don't know. But
well, he apparently turned down Atlanta United reached out to him apparently about an interview, and he turned it down, I think is what the story was.
Like
obviously
after he was fired?
No, this is before. Okay. This is like, gotcha. And then I think it was pretty widely reported that FC Cincinnati had been trying to get him before they hired Pat Noonan, and Philadelphia basically just was like, no. Which feels, I don't know. I guess that was long. That was 3 years ago now at this point, but I don't know. It's an interesting situation, and it's, I mean, it would be very similar to, I guess they missed the playoffs this year, so I guess that changes things. But
sure,
he was I think him and Peter Vermees were the only two coaches that had been there on their teams longer than Brian.
Yeah, and Vermees will just be there until he dies. So
exactly. I don't know how. I mean, that's the other thing that's pretty crazy contrast is you see how the last 3 to 7 years of Peter Vermees, and you compare that to the last 3 to 7 years of Jim Curtin, and which guy is the one getting fired?
It's pretty crazy. I mean, the only takeaway I can have really is that Sporting KC's ownership just doesn't really care, and they're happy to keep him around, and I'm not complaining about it, I guess.
Yeah. And then Bruce Arena got hired by San Jose Earthquakes to be both the GM and the head coach. The funny thing there is they hired him as the GM, and they demoted their current GM to so Chris Leach had been their GM, and they basically demoted him to like a second in command. It's a very strange power dynamic that they have there.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be super happy with that if I were him. But
no, I wouldn't think so. And it's the other thing that's been interesting is the San Jose, the people that I don't know how Earthquakes fans feel, but the handful of people I see who cover the Earthquakes don't seem really thrilled with it. Which I don't know I actually think Arena might be okay there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he didn't have success in New England.
No, that was the thing. And people have been kind of like, oh, he wasn't even that good in New England. Like, what are you talking about? He led them. He had like their best ever season.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's obviously not a long-term plan. He's an older gentleman. But I think that it's just nobody's going to want to come coach San Jose until they can get their house in order. And I think he's a guy that can do that. I think he can be a transitional guy to get them back to respectability. But I think ultimately, they just have really bad leadership, and that's probably not changing above him at least. So
yeah. Yep. Well, we should probably just call this. Aaron, I know it's been a late night for you, so thanks for staying up to do this.
Absolutely.
Thank you of course to our listeners, our subscribers. I want to give everyone another pitch. If you are interested, if you're listening to the show and you like what we do and you aren't currently a subscriber, just want to tell you, you can get it $25 a year, and you can feel a lot better about supporting local media. And if you're a regular listener, I would imagine that's something that you find important. So yeah, go out there and get a sub. All that said, thank you to our sponsor, Football Wines. Thank you to Lick It, our producer. I'm Jeremiah Cheyenne, signing off for Aaron Campo. This is No Sadietis. And remember, you'll never get alone.
We love you. Let's win another one!